You've worked with veterans.
Mhm.
What is PTSD in that context? What's the landscape of psychological sufferings that veteran soldiers go through?
Um, well, if we're talking about combat exposure, you're seeing things you're not meant to see. You're seeing the worst of humanity, people harming other people. It's not natural for others to intend to harm us. It's not natural for us to harm others. And this dehumanization can occur that's so troubling and disturbing that people have a hard time living with it later, or they just feel this ongoing anger. Um, it depends. It depends on the trauma they're exposed to. It depends on whether their convoy was ambushed by weapons that were purchased from money that was given to this village from the U.S. government. It depends on whether they did something that they have a hard time reconciling outside of war now that they're back home in civilization. Depends on whether they lost a lot of their comrades and feel that guilt of being a survivor. And again, not everybody develops PTSD. It's a mental disorder. It's serious. We talk so much about trauma, and PTSD gets thrown around lightly when actually it's very difficult to meet the full criteria for that diagnosis. And many people experience severe trauma in their lives, and only about 14% are likely to actually develop PTSD. It's an exception, not the norm. Traumatic stress is absolutely normal. After something traumatic happens, you'll likely have nightmares. You'll likely have anxiety. You'll feel depressed because you're a human being and something abnormal happened. But PTSD is a longer standing condition that is significantly impairing in a person's life. And I think we've lost that in some of the sort of narrative in society. Everybody has PTSD. But no, you can have traumatic stress, you can be distressed, you can be affected by trauma and not have that particular diagnosis. PTSD significantly impairs people's lives.
How do soldiers who suffer from PTSD or are close to that kind of diagnosis begin to heal? What's the path for healing?
Well, I will hand it to the military because I think in terms of working with their active duty service members, they really invest heavily in mental health. The U.S. Department of Defense was one of the first to bring animal-assisted therapy into any type of treatment in the early 1900s with bringing, farming into certain hospitals and letting veterans help with the farms and brush the horses, and which is so advanced because now we have all this research on animal-assisted therapy and how beneficial it is, and just looking in the eyes of a dog can increase your pain threshold and speed healing after a cardiac arrest, help people with dementia to ambulate more freely. It's incredible stuff, simple. And the military was ahead of the game on that. And I don't think that's changed. I did my training at a military hospital in Hawaii, Tripler Army Medical Center. It was phenomenal training. And our psych department, there was so much interesting research going on. And it was so integrated. So you might not imagine that the military would be doing this, but we had an acupuncture department. We had a chiropractic department. We had a yoga section. We were doing yoga sessions there. Anything that has evidence to support its efficacy was being utilized. And I think that's pretty cool about our government. They have a lot of funding, so I'm glad they're using it on that. The real challenge, I think, comes with the large-scale need of the veteran population. And they slip through the cracks. I know that the DoD had a campaign going where they were doing outreach to anybody who served, for instance, in the Vietnam War. The problem is they were trying to get all of these people assessed for PTSD, and it was great. Like, they were getting phone calls, mail. It was sort of saying, hey, we know that you served. Come on in, or let's schedule you an exam with a psychologist and just see if you're owed benefits. The idea of it's great. The problem is that they outsource to this third-party company. They're paying really low rates for a 1-hour meeting with a vet. And you don't need to be specifically trained in assessing PTSD. And so you're getting these variations and opinions that are coming through. And I've had clients who I've worked with for years, who have clear combat-related PTSD, according to gold standard measures, according to my knowing them and observing their symptoms and how impaired they are. And it is clearly associated with combat, the content of their intrusive thoughts, their nightmares, etc. And they are having a 1-hour meeting, sometimes by phone, with one of these psychologists who's been contracted by this third-party organization. That's not even enough for me to get through the first few symptom questions on the CAPS-5 assessment for PTSD. But in that hour, the psychologist is saying definitively no PTSD. And it's been a travesty for some people, especially for those who need an advocate the most. It tends to happen to my veterans who are maybe a little bit less sophisticated in presenting or advocating for themselves, more humble, less, the guys who deserve it the most, right? They're just getting passed over, and it's a maze. I'm not quite sure what the solution is, though. I've worked for government agencies. It's a massive population. I love that the outreach is even happening and trying to get these guys in for assessment. I think we can criticize any system. I'm glad that system is even happening, but it still needs to be better.
So I've got a chance to interact with a lot of soldiers from that served in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now a lot of soldiers from all different kinds of nations. In Ukraine, went to the front. There's a bond between soldiers unlike any other. I don't know if you can speak to why do you think that is. On the opposite side of PTSD, there's a deep human connection. There's like a love for each other. What is that? What is that about war and combat that creates that kind of
Well,
bond?
you're seeing, we talked earlier about that vulnerability, right? So I believe that most survival situations strip away all ego. And there are a couple different layers to this, but I have not served in war, so I want to be cautious here. But from what I know, just about psychology, and also from my own experience of survival type experiences, when you're with a group of people and all the ego stripped away, nothing else matters. The focus is on the here and now and a specific mission, or your day to day. You can get really close. You're very, very vulnerable. And also, in my experience, the guys I work with who have served, there aren't a lot of people who understand what they've been through. Not only some of the unspeakable things they've been through in combat, but some of the things that they feel are unspeakable about returning, especially if they are experiencing trauma. A lot of them, some of the things that service members with PTSD are the most reluctant to disclose is the feeling like they may not know if they love their children anymore or their wife, that they don't even know if they can love anymore, that they feel emotionally numb, that they want to kill someone, that they have a whole lot of racist beliefs and thoughts. There are a lot of things that can be associated with PTSD that aren't as clear or expected, and these guys don't have many people who understand it, or they don't think they would. But a lot of their fellow service members do.
Man, so I'm going back to Ukraine, and boy, nothing reveals the human condition in a more pure form than war. Especially the kind of war you get in that part of the world, especially the war in Ukraine, which is a very 20th century kind of war.
Brutal.